Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to our session of Humanity Rising today as we begin a 5-day program on the Conference of Parties, number 28, that's happening in Abu Dhabi. We've been tracking these conferences each year, gathering illustrious environmentalists, biologists, climate scientists, to comment on this extraordinarily futile organizational structure through the United Nations and world governments that year after year, and now again this year, fail the global public, fail the environment, and fail the integrity of human endeavor by consistently refusing en masse as governments and major global corporations to solve the most pressing problem in our world. Before we begin that discussion, I want to draw into our awareness a number of the issues that we have been tracking. As you all know, I'm here in Washington, and we're working very hard this week, which is the concluding week in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives around the UAP Disclosure Act. And just in a matter of days, the final wording of the legislation will be concluded, and we will know the degree to which we have a meaningful piece of legislation or not, and I'll keep everyone up to date on developments as they occur. The other development, which brings such sadness to my heart that it's hard for me even to speak about it, is what's happening in Gaza as the Israeli Army and Air Force pounds one of the most densely populated and congested areas in the world, quite literally to smithereens, with thousands of people dying, hundreds of thousands of homes and buildings being demolished, schools, mosques, health centers, hospitals, all being pulverized by the Israeli army. The whole world cringed when the Israelis demolished northern Gaza and demolished the Al-Shifa hospital, claiming that there were massive tunnels by Hamas underneath the hospital. And lo and behold, after it was all over, they showed a few Kalashnikovs and a couple of maps, a tunnel or two, but nothing that would remotely justify the massive destruction that they wrought on the people of Gaza. The one thing that I want to bring in today is the complicity and the hypocrisy of the US government. We've been hearing in the news, if you listen to the mainstream media, you hear that President Biden and Vice President Harris have been encouraging the Israelis to spare civilians. You hear that the White House is trying to get more humanitarian aid. But according to the Wall Street Journal on Friday, and then again on Saturday, what the United States is actually doing behind the verbiage is sending to Israel the latest in artillery and munitions, including what they call bunker buster bombs. Bunker buster bombs that they used in Afghanistan and in Iraq, exploding the insides of mountains. And I want to just take a moment to describe what a bunker buster bomb does. It's a massive bomb that weighs about 2,000 pounds. That's a ton. And the initial warhead explodes a hole between 10 and 20 meters deep into the earth, 30 to 60 feet down. And then the second explosion goes sideways and destroys everything. That's what they're going to be using on the population in Gaza. The carnage that we witnessed in northern Gaza was merely a curtain raiser to what they're going to do now to try to eliminate Hamas. And I want to raise this because there was a comment made within the last 24 hours by Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense of the United States. And he made a very interesting comment where he said that if the Israelis continue with their annihilation against the population of Gaza, they may win a tactical victory, but they will suffer a strategic defeat. Because if you decimate civilian populations and indiscriminately destroy, wound, and maim and kill women and children, all you succeed in doing is alienating the very population you seek to conquer. And you force the population into increasingly dense enclaves, within the context of which it's impossible, unless you're going to annihilate every man, woman, and child, to eliminate the very group, in this case Hamas, you seek to defeat. This is Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense of the United States. And I want to raise it because while the Biden administration refuses to engage in a ceasefire, refuses in any way to get the Israelis to act in a humanitarian way, and in fact are providing them all the munitions, everything that the Israelis are dropping down on Gaza says made in USA. So the complicity between the US and Israeli governments is extraordinary. Extraordinary. And it is a debacle of politics and humanitarian ethics at a scale we haven't seen for a very, very long time. And President Erdogan in Turkey, I think, called it when he said Netanyahu has earned the epithet, the butcher of Gaza. In history, different leaders earn different epithets. You have Alexander the Great, you have Suleiman the Magnificent, you have various Charles the Bald, you have different epithets that are associated with different leaders. And we now have the butcher of Gaza backed up by the United States of America, wreaking havoc as we speak with bunker buster bombs in one of the most densely populated areas of our world. Just think the implications of what that says about not only the United States and Israel, but the rest of the world, which is largely, other than a few comments and votes in the United Nations, standing by, doing nothing. So in a certain sense, we're all complicit in what is going on. And it's within that context that I want to shift now to Abu Dhabi. That's where the COP28 is being convened. It's being chaired by Sultan Al Jaber, who is the CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, who said yesterday that there was no scientific evidence that in any way indicates that fossil fuels are a cause of climate change or global warming. And if you've been tracking the news, he's been using the conference actually to cut oil deals with various countries and oil companies, because the largest group of non-state actors in Abu Dhabi and in COP28 are the oil companies. That's what we have going on in the face of the most critical challenge facing humanity. And as we're going to hear in a few minutes, even if successful, their analysis is so completely unrealistic and their methodology so completely anachronistic that they're tracking the wrong indicators to actually solve the problems that increasingly beset us. And the general comment that I want to make at this very, very troubling time in our history is that the same mentality that drops bunker buster bombs on the population in Gaza is the mentality that's running COP28, devoid of any ethical norms, concerned only with the politics of power and profit, while we, the people, suffer the consequences of a dereliction of duty unprecedented in modern time. And each day over the next 5 days, we're going to be hearing from different people from different parts of the world that have been involved for many, many decades in this issue, and will be providing perspectives, not only on COP28, but around the solutions that if as a world community, we would embrace, just like in Gaza, just like in Ukraine, just like in most human conflicts, if we simply embrace the solutions that are obvious, we could solve our problems in a very, very short period of time. And the question that why we do not is a question of deep ontology of human consciousness and culture that we need to spend much time fathoming. I'm very privileged now to invite someone that you've seen many, many times before on Humanity Rising, particularly in relationship to the COPs that we've been tracking over the last number of years. Ed Muller, who is one of the great, I would say, regeneration ecologists in the planet. He's also the founder and CEO of the University of International Cooperation in Costa Rica. He's probably done more to demonstrate the regenerative power of biodiversity work than anyone, at least that I personally know. So Ed, I want to welcome you to our program and just begin by inviting you to comment on anything that I have just said in my opening, whether it's about the situation in Gaza or COP28, and that will start our dialogue. But I would just welcome your comments.
Thank you, Jim. Wow, it's amazing. 817 days you've been at this. I'm considered stubborn, but I think you're more stubborn than I am. This is an achievement. I mean, this is really an achievement. I don't want to go into discussing Ukraine, Gaza, and so on. Those are the visible tops of the icebergs. And they're visible because their interest behind them, interest for the white northern hemisphere. More people are dying every day because of pesticides, because of oil, because of the pharma industry, because the way we are developing. The economy is excluding people. And now the global change, and I prefer to talk about global change, not only climate change, and I'll go into that later on. It's already getting to tipping points that will just accelerate a mass extinction of humans and all other life on the planet. We are very egocentric. We look at the deaths of humans. But if we look at the abundance of biodiversity in my region, in Latin America, the most biodiversity intense region in the world, is down 94% in the abundance. And people don't understand this because our focus is on species.
Say that statistic one more time.
Okay, the abundance of biodiversity in Latin America has dropped 94%.
Amazing.
So we have 6% of the abundance left for ecosystems to function. They won't function for a long time. So we're getting to a point of no return. And the science, because it's reductionist and because we're focused on small things, we are worried that 1 million species are going extinct. That's not even relevant. I mean, it is relevant, but the issue is the abundance of biodiversity is collapsing. That's the amount of biodiversity. And for those who don't understand what I'm talking about, I bet you and I scraped a lot of windshields when we went out with a car of all the insects that got stuck on the windshield. You don't see that anymore. That is abundance. So birds, insect-eating birds in my country are down to less than 20%. Why? Because we've killed all the insects, spraying the Monsantos and all these Bayer and all these other things on fields so we can feed pretty pineapples, which are totally poisonous, to Europe and to the US. We're the largest pineapple producer, and we're left with toxic waters and lost ecosystems because they spray and these sprays evaporate, go into the clouds, and when it rains over the national parks, what it's raining is pesticides. We're not even looking at the dimension. We're not even looking at the dimension that 75% of the soils in the planet have been destroyed. And the soil is the only solution to keeping life on the earth. That's what got us to where we started. So it is an issue, these wars, but the war on life is a lot bigger. And that is transparent. I mean, that's transparent in the sense that nobody is even seeing it. So what do we do? How do we change this around if we are still stuck in the carbon tunnel vision in the COPs? Those are not solutions. Reducing carbon, net zero, race to zero, all these things, it's not about carbon. There are lots of other priorities, and I'm not saying it's not important, but there may be, in a few minutes, I'll show one graph, which is the planetary boundaries, and we can start from there, but I'll go back to you.
Well, let's show that slide because I think that's the basis of what you really want to communicate in terms of biodiversity.
So everybody knows what the Anthropocene is. It's basically a time when the biggest changes on the planet are being caused by humans. And we've been in the Anthropocene for the last 20, maybe 30 years. It took 32 scientists 20 years to decide if we were or not yet in the Anthropocene. I mean, that is the way reductionist science works. And now, yes, we're definitely in the Anthropocene. But the Planetary Boundaries was published by the Stockholm Resilience Center in 2009 for the first time. And they've been adding areas, but ever since the beginning, the loss of biodiversity is by far the process that has us on the highest risk for us to lose the safe operating space for humans. So that's what it's defined. That green center there is our safe operating space. What does that mean? if we would be inside that green area, we could be sustainable. We could live for a long time. So biodiversity loss is now in the high-risk zone. It is followed by novel entities, which is basically chemicals and plastics. And marine plastics are a good example of that. Strangely enough, what has not even appeared in the discussions of any COP is fertilizer use. And phosphorus and nitrogen for a long time have been destroying the planet way more than carbon, way more than carbon. And we can get rid of it overnight. We are proving that we can grow 10 or more tons of food, good quality food, regenerative food, nutritious food per hectare, per month with poor communities, more than any commercial farmer can do. Now, getting rid of fertilizers would be just not even a legal process. It's just showing that if you eat chemical food, you're going to get sick, you're going to get cancer, you're going to get autism, you're going to get Alzheimer. Whereas if you eat regenerative food, you're going to get healthy, and we're going to get rid of most of the human diseases. So this would be something that we can just demonstrate and outcompete the traditional agricultural practices that are still pushed by universities with a reductionist approach. Then comes, if you look at the CO2, it's still not even purple. So the whole discussion in the COP, in all the COPs, and now we're 30 years since the convention where the three conventions were established in Rio in 1992. After 28 years, it has been very difficult for even the science to penetrate in the decisions and the discussions. In the pre-COP 25, which was here in Costa Rica, I organized a side event on the importance of soil for carbon capture. At that time, I was in the Scientific Council for Climate Change, appointed by the president of Costa Rica. And when I proposed to organize this side event on the role of soil and carbon, my science colleagues in the commission said, no, there's not enough evidence of the importance of soil to revert climate change. So we don't allow you to use the 4C, the council name, to do it. I organized it on the name of the university. But the system organized a parallel event just next door to my room with something a lot more attractive, because they're not interested in listening to alternatives. So we need to really rethink, and the best way to do it is not to reinvent the warm water. We just have to look at nature. What did nature do for billions of years? What did nature do to get us from 4,000 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere to 280 pre-industrial? It put it into the ocean, into the soils. And the soils were the biggest deposits. And that carbon has been released every year by tilling, by putting fertilizers, by killing the soil, requiring more chemicals. So if we look at this, we can easily find which are the points that we have to start working on urgently to be able to revert the whole process.
What is the meaning of the graphs there around ocean acidification, atmospheric aerosol loading, and stratospheric ozone depletion? Are you indicating that those are basically still within the safe operating space?
That's correct. If you look at aerosol loading, which is, for example, the ozone hole, it has been actually getting reduced year after year. Why? And they consider that Montreal meeting like a fantastic achievement. But again, it was a few chemical compounds which had to be eliminated from the industry to start reverting the hole. So ozone depletion came from liquids used in air conditioners and in spray cans and stuff like that. Getting rid of them was easy. The problem is solving the other issues. They're complex issues. And if I go back in history to what science is today, what institutions are today, what universities are today, we go back to the Greeks. And I remember fighting with my statistic teachers when they told me, No, Edward, you have to go to one hypothesis, one question. The scientific method is about finding one question and finding the answer to that question. And I always told my teachers, look, you're wrong. You know, there are 100 questions and 100 answers, and many of them are completely right. So by drilling down to one question, we're going to a reductionist approach, but that is how science was shaped. That's how peer-reviewed journals work. And then we come to Descartes, who said, no, the spiritual and the material are separate. And that gave us the empowerment as humans to think we could dominate nature. If I fly over the US, I can see the coastlines have been totally altered. They're all built. The rivers have been straightened out. And that is common practice, which we are importing. My country is being destroyed by building marinas, which are for a few people. And we're losing our country because of importing these tactics which destroy nature. So then comes Newton along and says that in the system, the reaction or the relationship between two components of the system are their mere energy attraction or repelling of the energy between the two components. And in nature, this is not true. If we look at nature, 1 + 1 can mean 5, can mean 10, can mean 20. You know, it's amazing how powerful nature is. But no, we're taught to think linear, and these things are exponential, and we're taught to think reductionist. And a Ministry of Agriculture does not talk to the Ministry of Environment. They usually have opposing policies. How are we going to solve this? How are we going to solve it if a university teacher in ecology cannot talk with an anthropologist or with an economist? There's no common language. So it's beyond transdisciplinary. And then going back to the COP, everything is focused on net zero emissions reductions. I was also, while I was in the Scientific Council for Climate Change, involved in the plan for the decarbonization of Costa Rica. 80% of that plan, and that's where I resigned to the council, is electric mobility. I mean, what? A tropical country betting on electric cars to reduce its emissions? What I'm doing now is showing that by converting just 200,000 hectares of cattle into regenerative grazing plus biodiversity, it's a whole system we've developed, I can, in 3 years, capture 25% of the country's emissions. And if I have the resources, I could go to the million hectares, a bit over a million hectares we have in cattle land, and we could be at 140% emissions reduction every year. So the country could keep on polluting whatever it wants. I'd still be capturing 20 or 30% over the yearly production. And this at the global level is the same. Cattle at the global, if we convert cattle land today into holistic grazing, we'd be capturing about 43 gigatons of carbon every year. And we're producing 36.5. And this is published by Rodale. Okay? Even a more conservative scientist like Ratan Lal says that by the end of this decade, just by managing soils, we could reduce climate change. We could eliminate climate change. I think it's 127 parts per million, if I'm not mistaken, Ratan's paper. Just in this century alone, just by managing soils. So we could actually have very simple processes where we can turn things around within this decade. So why keep on discussing machines to capture carbon? The money that's being put into these machines, they could change these cattle farms in a year. And there's this fear of scientists having to face that they were wrong all the time. So it's an ego process. They don't want to admit that they were wrong. And that's why they don't allow you to discuss not killing cattle. So is that science? No, science is, okay, let's do it and see if it's wrong. At least we tried. But now we're demonstrating here in Costa Rica and other places in the world. I mean, Zeth Itzkan had been working on this with Soil for Climate for years, and Alan Savory and a lot of other people, which get hammered by the traditional science. So we can actually turn this around. Now, what do we need? We need to give young people hope. We need to give them guidance. And we need to give them education. And right now, we as a university are seeing tremendous difficulty because the demand for regenerative education is not there yet. So we're fighting for something that the demand is not there yet. But for me, having professionals that know how to do regeneration, and it's not only about environment, it's political, it's social, it's health, it's spiritual, is the most critical thing. Our universities are educating people in professions that don't exist anymore. They just haven't realized it, and that are not preparing anybody to face even the current challenges, not even talking about the future challenges. So we need to reinvent the education, and that requires support, that requires funding, that requires scholarships. But we need to train hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of, I call them first responders for regeneration. Young people that can build professions, new professions, that actually solve problems by what? Producing better food, healthier food, by changing the way local governments work, by changing the way we think of development and infrastructure, by creating conditions for inclusive economies where everybody in a bioregion actually thrives and not only a few. So it's a whole shift of the system. So we are not going to solve this by focusing on CO2. It's not going to. So I really don't care what happens in the COP anymore. And I haven't gone to COPs for many years because I just don't believe in them anymore, especially now that it's being hijacked by the oil industry. Why are we wasting all that money? I haven't done the last sum, but I think it should be close to 400,000 people have gone to the COPs. And we're still not there. We're still not there.
It becomes like a small city.
It's a show. It's a fashion show. I'm going to go show myself there, take pictures with the buildings in the back and all these fancy things. That's not going to put food into the mouth of all these people that are being killed way beyond the wars.
Ed, I'd like to, since we still have the slide up, I'd like to better understand some of the indicators. I noticed, for example, that the biggest one that's the most out of control is the genetic in relationship to the biosphere integrity. Are you talking there about bioengineering and genetically modified what does that mean? And why is that
biodiversity
out of control?
Yeah. Biodiversity includes genetic diversity within the species.
Oh, you
and
mean
there's no way
of biodiversity is the most critical problem in the world. I got it.
Yeah.
That's not about genetic engineering or anything like that.
No.
Oh,
genetic engineering is the worst thing that we can do right now. If we go back to the precautionary principle, which the US did not sign, and that's why all these companies are based there, you shouldn't do something unless you know it's not going to do harm. And right now, genetic engineering, even though so many people are betting on it, artificial meat and all this, is extremely dangerous. There was a paper published by the UNAM in Mexico, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, probably about 15 years now. And they forced them to retract it. I think it was published in Nature, because they published that 1.5% of wild plants were already contaminated with genes from manipulation. This is just by pollen jumping from one plant to another, or by bees going from one plant to another. After 4 or 5 years, they got together with Stanford and published the next document, which said 2.5% of weeds were already contaminated with genetic modified genes. What happens? These are proteins that nature does not recognize. So one of the things that's killing bees, and there's lots of papers written on this, is bees going to transgenic or genetically modified plants, eating the pollen, and it's a protein that they don't understand, their body does not understand, and just kills them. So we don't know the impacts of this bioengineering, which people find it's great, but it's not. It's not. What it does is give power to these companies so that they own the seeds. And if you grow anything that is not buying their seed from them, they'll sue you. So we need to go back to bring the diversity. I mean, biodiversity or agrodiversity, whatever you want to call it. We humans used over 12,000 crops in our evolution. Today, 95% of our food comes from 15 crops. We need to go back to getting the diversity. I mean, my grandmother cooked so many things that grow like weeds in every garden, which are not, now we eat kiwis brought from New Zealand, and we need to get back. And what we're doing here is recovering that understanding of genetic diversity, because that will give us resilience. If climate change is happening, it is happening. When it gets even worse, we will have a huge genetic diversity to select those crops that will survive the new conditions.
Now, let me ask again clarification on the climate change, where you're putting radiative forcing is more dangerous and critical than CO2 concentration. Speak more to that.
Well, radiative forcing is the amount of heat that is captured in the process, and has to do not only with CO2, it has to do with methane, it has to do with a lot of other components that are even clouds, a lot of other things that happen in the atmosphere. So CO2 is one of them, but my thing is, it's not the most important one.
Right. So the radiative forcing is just really
methane,
the warming.
But the methane, yeah. And the thing is, methane, if you look at the maps, and there's a lot of AI information now using the satellites, people are blaming cattle for methane. Methane, if you look at the maps, it's coming from the poles. Why? Because the permafrost is thawing.
Yeah.
And that methane heats up the planet up to 86 times faster. Now you go to IPCC and they consider methane 23 times more radiative forcing than CO2. 23 times only. 23 times is a long 100 years, because after 6 years, the methane starts turning into CO2, gets broken down. But in the first years, methane heats up to 86 times faster the planet. So if you look at the maps in Siberia, in Alaska, in northern Canada, you'll see these craters where methane has been released in huge amounts. Now, what happens? That methane, as it's released, heats those areas 86 times faster. So it's exponential. That could be the bomb ticking where we go extinct very quickly. And that's not even in the discussions. It will cause too much fear and panic in the population. But the only way to do that, no matter if we could reduce all emissions today, that would still keep on going, because it's happening with current emissions, which are going to stay in the atmosphere for many, many years unless we pull carbon out of the atmosphere. So there's another reason why we need to go to regenerative cattle, regenerative agriculture, and biological corridors. So what we're doing is we're getting cattle, let's say 100 hectares or 100 acres of cattle land. We're converting them to holistic so we can double the amount of cows. That means that we can only use 50 or 60 acres and get 40 acres back to nature. So in those 40 acres that are left empty, we are rebuilding biological connectivity with natural evolution systems based on the Lacandon Indians. So we plant balsa trees at the beginning, they give shade, and then nature takes care, or we bring in other trees and bushes to actually regenerate all that land to a natural landscape that will also capture carbon, but it allows biodiversity to thrive. So these are very simple techniques. Why? Because the farmer is going to get double his income. And at the same time, the water harvest in the biological corridors with key lines and other techniques that we can do, we actually recover the water supply. So in the dry season, cattle doesn't suffer that much, and the farmer still makes money. So we can actually get better jobs, get better income, produce good meat and dairy, and revert climate change, everything at the same time. It's a win-win-win situation, and it's very simple. We're starting a new project now in January. It's 15,000 hectares to start with. That's 40,000 acres. That project will probably cost under $5 million for the next 15 years. So scaling this is really cheap compared to building for $1.1 billion a carbon capture machine. I'm surrounded with carbon capture machines that have evolved for millions of years. Everything green. Why not use nature to help us? Why not? Nature is still willing to help us. We gave it 4 months vacation in 2020 during COVID when we were locked up. What did nature do? It thrived. No matter which channel you showed, nature popped back in 4 months. Just think if we leave it and support it, it will grow back. And that's where hope for kids is coming.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to educate kids using nature as a teacher in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask about those novel entities. What do you mean by novel entities?
Okay, this was just published last year, I think in April or January. I can't remember. There are two, in January. In April was the green water. And basically it's chemical and plastics.
Oh.
So plastic pollution, you just look at the
awful.
oceans. I mean, I don't want to buy marine salt anymore. You're eating, people think of equivalent of a credit card per month or something like that, of the amount of plastic we're eating. But the thing is, we're seeing plastics in mother's milk. We're seeing plastics in babies. We're seeing microplastics in basically everything. And it's not the little physical impact of a micropellet. It's that they start degrading and release toxic chemicals. So we're poisoning ourselves. So yes, Gaza is horrible, but this is killing millions of people.
Yeah.
But it's invisible. How does this industry even dare to show its face in public? How does a soft drink company that sells poison for 130 years, which is the largest factory of plastics in the world, get prizes for corporate responsibility by cleaning up beaches, cleaning up the bottles that are washed onto the shore? I mean, it's ridiculous. That is sustainability. That is corporate responsibility under sustainability. So regeneration is beyond sustainability for those who don't understand what regeneration is. It's all our activities should promote chances for life to thrive, human and other life forms, chances for communities to thrive, and be business. I'm not against business. I'm not against profit. It has to be there. That's part of us. But an environmental impact assessment that allows you to do less harm, that is immoral. It can still be legal, but it's immoral. Yeah. It's not moral. Gold mine, you use a cell phone, you have to allow gold mines. Come on, 98% of the gold is stuck in banks. We don't need more gold to produce more cell phones. We don't need more copper. There are 50 kilos of copper per person above the surface already. We just got to go and mine the landfills. So the whole industry is cheating on humanity, saying that, if you use a cell phone, you can't be against this mining. Come on, the whole system has to be rebuilt. And the only way to do that is with education and with good communication, narrative.
Yeah. Now, the biochemical flows, you have P and N. Explain
phosphor and nitrogen, fertilizers. Phosphor and nitrogen. We can just get rid of them, and we're showing that we can get rid of them. We are producing more food faster without a single drop of chemicals, just by using indigenous practices. Yes, you cannot put a 50-foot machine on this, but do we need agriculture with 50-foot machines? Or do we need local production? My focus is getting all the big food companies out out. We don't need them. Food has to be produced locally, where the farmer harvests it at 4 or 5 in the morning and you have it on your plate for breakfast without loss of food, without the logistic chains. That's good quality food. When we actually set up a co-op. It's a regenerative co-op where farmers that don't have the ability to get to the markets are going to be helped by this co-op to get their food directly to the consumer. So local consumption that uses local production. And those people, the farmers, are getting a better price because the big Walmarts are not taking 80% of the value of the food. They're getting the right price, and the consumer is getting the right price. And not only that, it's already proven scientifically in peer-reviewed journals that regenerative food is a lot more nutritious. The nutrient density, and not even talking about the flavor. I invite you again. You haven't come. So I can take you to one of our regenerative farms and you can get a mustard or a basil. I want to see no tears come out of your eyes when you put that into your mouth. The flavor is so strong. It's like eating wasabi. That is gone in chemical agriculture, and it's gone in a transport process that takes 2 or 3 weeks for the food to get to you. Whereas if you pick it up from the ground right away, I mean, the smell of basil and the amount of pollinators that are flying at 5 in the morning, we are now seeing, after 4 months, we already had 172 species of insects coming back to our food farms. After a year, the good insects control the bad insects. So we have an ecosystem functioning. Do you think a forest needs pesticides to control the insects? No. So we're actually seeing increases in populations 10-fold, 20-fold in our food farms. And you tell this to any professor in a traditional agricultural school, we're cultivating insects while we cultivate food. They say that you're crazy. You need to get rid of the insects to be able to produce food. No, you don't. No, you don't. Yeah, let's say they eat 2% of our food. Let's keep on feeding them because they're part of the ecosystem. But we're measuring bats, we're measuring birds, and we're now starting to get enough data to be able to prove that we can actually bring biodiversity back quickly. I'm not talking in 10 years, I'm talking months. Of course, I'm in the paradise. Costa Rica's paradise, it's tropics. You spit out a seed and it will grow, and it grows quickly. But how many countries are in the tropics that could benefit, not for compensation of damage? Get that language out of there. We also do damage. I mean, I grew up driving cars. So everybody's guilty. But if the investment would come to change the way we produce our food, to change our educational system, we could change the world into abundance, maybe in a decade. Why do we have to wait? We need bioregional approaches. We need what Bucky Fuller is supposed to have said, let's not fight the system. Let's build a better one that will make the old one obsolete. Yeah. And that's what I'm focused on in our educational process at the university. I'm not going to fight the system anymore. Is it worthwhile discussing with the president of the COP about going back to living in caves if we get rid of oil? Is it worthwhile spending saliva on that discussion? No. What I need to show is the cattle farmers that they can make more money and bring biodiversity back. What I need to do with the food farms is that the local communities have abundant food, the kids grow healthy. I remember after 2 months, we started harvesting after 2 months of turning degraded soil into 10 tons of food per month. And the mother of one of the children, when we started, I got there the first time, she was crying because she had a little baby and 2 little kids on her, hanging onto her clothing. And she said, I've been feeding them junk food for the last 3 days. That's the only thing you can buy here. This was COVID. After 2 months, when we started the project, she called the kids and said, look, Edward, their skin is shiny again.
Yeah.
Their skin is shiny again. That is worth more than having Bayer establish a fucking for language. The company, their
Right.
buyer is going to build a big plant here. The worst company in the world is going to build, and the government is, hey, jobs. Jobs? No. Jobs are created locally on the bioregional approach. We need to work with local governments. We need to get women, young women, into political places that have empathy in their decisions and not greed that you and I with white hair are supposed to have. Luckily, we don't have it, but most men do.
Maybe you guys end your screen share and then we can just talk more directly. Great. Well, thank you, Ed. Let me broaden the conversation, because I know that you've been at the forefront of networking bioregions together. And I remember last year there was discussions with people in Denmark and also down in Chile and different parts of the world. Describe for us the work that's being done now to link different biodiversity committed regions together globally. And where do you think that process is? Because I think I certainly agree with you, and I think a growing number of ecologists agree that the single most important indicator is biodiversity. Yeah. So that's far more than CO2. So what's the status of that? Is the same statistic 94% reduction in Latin America in biodiversity? Is that worldwide? And what are we doing to ameliorate that at a global level?
You know, it's interesting. If you look at the table, the graphs, Europe only lost 32%. And if you, we're doing things great in Europe. No, Europe already lost its biodiversity 200 years ago. So they lost 32% of what they had left. Here in this country, we have 900 bird species. So of course, we can lose 400 bird species and we still have 500 bird species. Whereas in Europe, how many bird species are there? So yeah, the loss is less in percentage-wise of abundance. Yeah. And I'm not saying it's less important. What's happening in Europe is the migrating birds that come from Africa. By the time they get there, the global warming already made the trees flower. And the insects that are there, they kill the flowering and they reduce production because the birds that eat the insects are not there yet. But when the birds finally get there to make their nests, that flowering process passed. The larvae of these insects are already gone and they don't have what to feed their birds, their babies. So populations are just plummeting. I'm not saying Europe is better off. I mean, it's just they started with less. So we still have the highest biodiversity. That's why we've lost so much. Now,
gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I imagine the similar situation in Africa and much of South Asia, or not?
It's all over the world, of course. I can't remember them right now, the numbers for Africa and Asia. They're a bit less. But the thing is, Africa is probably the richest continent right now. But the problem is they're rich also in minerals. And you have the international aid, helping with donations and stuff in these countries. If they would pay what they're stealing at a reasonable price, the cobalt for the cars, these countries would be rich. But there's a neocolonialism still going on where we're keeping on extracting diamonds, minerals from developing countries, paying them really crappy wages for that. But then we send in donations or a project that teaches 10 communities how to be startups. Whereas what we need to find is a just system that will pay real and not keep on extracting.
Exactly.
So we can fund our own processes if we'd have the resources to do it. And yes, as a university, we're going to be 30 years old in April. 30 years since I had black hair when I started. And we're still struggling every year to get to the end of the year to pay salaries, because all we did was implement sustainability initially and now regeneration for the last 15 years. And the demand is not there yet. People don't recognize how many students are actually going to Google regeneration to be able to find a new career. They're not there yet. So we've always been pioneering the whole process. We started moving online education back in 1997, and ubiquity is online. Well, in 1997, I was told by government, there's no way you can educate using internet. I had to get lawyers to get our first programs approved. So we've been at the forefront, and we've been now teaching regeneration for, I think we launched the first global program on regenerative entrepreneurship, 2019. People didn't even know what it was. But we have, I wrote 30 emails to friends, Alan Savory, all these top people in regeneration, Daniel Val. I thought I would get 4 or 5 emails back saying, yes, they would like to teach. We ended up with 55 speakers. People like Alan said, may I talk again? Alan talked 3 times. The energy is there, but we need to scale this. We need to get, we're developing this hive system, which you saw because we launched part of it at the COP in Glasgow, right? A couple of years ago. That is an educational process, going back to the bioregions, that include teachers from all the world, so the best experts can set up their courses. A student can actually design his own pathway or her own pathway of learning with the nuggets, with the short courses and everything. We've done this with Ubiquity. And then get a certificate at the end. I don't care for titles hanging on the wall. And with their digital passport, they can show their achievements, their networks. Who do they know? What have they done? Is that actually better than an exam saying you're a professional? And then we have a global network of mentors from around the world. And then we have bioregions where regeneration is happening. So a student can actually choose the pathway, get in contact with the thing we launched together with Ubiquity in Glasgow, with people in every country. Oh, I'd like to go to Costa Rica. Let me see who's working regeneration in Costa Rica. You go to the country, you can click on the people, you can send me an email. Can I go and practice regeneration with you? So they're learning online. They have this group of global mentors, and they can go to any place in the world once it's established in network. You know something? We haven't been able to get the salary for the coordinator of the network. I'm paying the salary of the coordinator of the Regenerative Communities Network. We couldn't get the funding for a basic salary. And we now have Mexico, Costa Rica's pioneer. We launched 2018 Costa Rica Regenerativa, Regenerate Costa Rica. We have Chile since 2 years ago, and it's working well. I helped launch Argentina in February this year. We have Peru, the project that they won the prize now, the British prize. Anyway, I can't remember the prize. The replanting of the mountains in Peru by indigenous communities, a regeneration. So Peru is in. Colombia has been already working on regeneration for several years. And we're expanding this network globally. So we can co-create solutions together. The systems are there. I can work with somebody in Chile in parallel and start working on. So we're not in a classroom. We're not in a lab with 4 walls. We're actually collaborating. And my bet has always been that Latin America will lead regeneration. And the reason, most important reason, is we still have what we call in Spanish, diálogo de saberes, the dialogue between knowledge systems. We still have enough indigenous knowledge that evolved together with nature. And the European academics go to a country to study indigenous knowledge, and then they come back after 2 months and say, oh, I know indigenous knowledge. No, no. It's something you live with, and you really, it has to be in your heart, in your spirit. So we are learning the techniques we're using with launching balsa wood that grows shade, and then big trees can grow underneath. You go and plant 1 million trees, 90% die. Why? Because these trees never grew in plain sunlight. In Europe, they do. And North America, they do. But in the tropics, the primary trees, they grow in the shade of a forest. So we need shade. We need a cover on top. And balsa, after 2 or 3 years, produces that cover and starts producing mulch. So there we can actually start planting the trees that won't get burned with sunshine and won't get covered with weeds. Whereas if we do it in the open, after 2 months, they're covered with weeds and most of them die. So we learned this, on a visit with Lacandon and Don Manuel Castellanos. And I just thought, wow, it's so simple. You know, what we're using in agriculture is mulch. We started with a Cuban system. The dean of my One Health school, he's one of the founders, the 3 co-founders of the food system that saved Cuba from starvation in 1989, 1990, when the Russians moved out. But it needed a lot of compost. So for urban areas, it's good. Now we're substituting all of this just by mulch, by putting a big, thick layer of mulch. The sun doesn't dry the soil. It doesn't kill the microbes. The rain doesn't erode the soil. Central America loses 200 tons of topsoil per year per hectare. 200 tons. That's 25 dump trucks loaded with soil every year and dumped into the river, which goes into killing the ocean. By putting mulch on, there's no erosion. The fungi just grow back. They bring bacteria that fix nitrogen. The whole soil turns alive. The microbiome of that soil turns healthy. That's why the plants and the animals have a healthy microbiome, and we can reestablish our microbiome, which has been destroyed by even food coloring that we put in M&Ms that are poisonous for kids. Okay? So by producing good food, we can get rid of most of the diseases that today, I mean, kids with autism, they weren't with autism when I grew up. Why? Because we didn't eat all the junk food we're eating today. So we can actually redo the whole world through regeneration.
Beautiful. I tell you, you're one of my heroes, Ed. You are fiercely on the front lines in a completely passionate way. I just want to acknowledge your presence on this call and the passion with which you're living your life and leading the charge. It's very, very impressive, you know, and it's such a sad thing that something like regenerative agriculture, it's hard to even find the salary of the coordinator of the network, while the billions and trillions are spent on all kinds of destructive mechanisms like the Monsanto seeds and the wars and COP20. I wonder just how much money was just spent by the Abu Dhabi government just on the parties and conference facilities for COP28. It was probably in the tens of millions.
And I can't get $50,000 for scholarships. With $50,000,
yeah,
I can get 25 students studying in a master's program in regeneration.
Yeah.
And I need $300,000-$400,000 a year to really get a massive production of new people, new professionals. This passion, it's born because I have hope. It's because I'm seeing results. I'm not talking about results. Right. Yeah, I published a white paper on my model of regeneration, 2015. But then I said, I'm not going to be a regular academic and just be happy because it's published. No, we need to show. And that's why we launched Costa Rica Regenerativa in 2018, where we're showing on the ground that regeneration can be done. Local government, in the municipality of Nicoya, we got about $1.5 million fresh money generated by them with better management. And 40% of that fresh money is going into regenerative projects. That's a signed agreement with the municipality. So we're working at the government level. We're starting a center to educate teachers around the planet how to bring nature as a teacher into schools. I still haven't gotten the funding to get that center going, but it's been proven for 25 years in Peru The guy from Peru that ran it, Joaquin Lejia, he moved here last year to be able to work with me because I didn't answer his emails. And one day he knocks on my door, I'm here because I want to work with you. We still haven't been able to launch this program, but we need to bring nature into kids. I mean, kids are totally absent of nature now. So we need to bring, so I'm making a call and we're going to set up, there's an MRV collective which we set up and it's a 501c3. We can actually receive money for these scholarships. We need urgently money for scholarships. We don't have time anymore. 2023, I can't believe that the COP is going the way it's going with 23 in the records. We shot
hottest year
over.
In 155,000 years.
We're in overshoot mode, way overshoot. I mean, if we don't get our hands on the ground and working, we don't have a chance. And I have an 11-year-old son, and actually my grandkids were here last week, 4 and 3 years and 2 years old. I can't sleep thinking they don't have a future. I can't sleep they won't get to my age unless I do something. And it's time to do something. So we need to get together and move forward.
I think that's a good concluding note. Ed, thank you. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your leadership. And it's the bottom line. We've got to do something to animate our hope, and we need to do it now.
It's now.
Yeah.
And we have the solutions. They're there.
Yeah.
We don't have to invent them anymore. We got them.
Yeah. Well, I hope you can join the after session chat group for a few minutes.
I will.
And so we'll end our session there, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. Stan will just put it in a moment. And then for those of you who are watching passively, you received the link to the after session chat in the Zoom reminder that went out an hour before the call. And then we'll see you all tomorrow for our second session on the COP28 and what we can do collectively for climate change. But Ed Muller, you're a hero, man. Thank you so much. And I'll call you later.
We all can be heroes. And you're a hero for 870 days.
Okay, everyone. Bye.